Paper Mario is one of my favorite series, and I haven't touched some of these games in over a decade, so I went back and played all 6 back-to-back to find out if they actually hold up, if they're actually better than I thought, or if I've just been lying to myself. Going back to the original Paper Mario was the one I was most interested in replaying, because this is a game people talk about like it's untouchable, but often without a lot of actual specifics. Just, it's a classic, it aged really well, it laid the foundation, and then move on. I first played it on the Wii Virtual Console around 2014 or so I came to it late, after years of being told it was one of the greatest Mario RPGs. When I set out to replay all these games, this is the one I started first. And I wanted to see if it was nostalgia talking, or if it started to show its age in the past 10 years or so. And the simple answer is that it does hold up way better than I expected. But also the prologue is still a complete slog, and I will not pretend otherwise. The opening with Bowser is fantastic though. He steals the Star Rod, becomes literally and launches Mario out of the castle. Already a great start, but then you wake up in Goomba Village and an elderly Goomba very slowly explains that the boots go on Mario's feet, and the game has that very specific early RPG energy of just not trusting you to figure anything out. On my first playthrough, I had patience for this because the world was new. Replaying it, I was just mashing through, like I was doing quick time events in Resident Evil 5. I just want to say to the game that I've played video games before, we can just skip this, but there is no option for that. It is very slow, and it does hold your hand for a while, but it does get a lot better after that. Once you finally get past the prologue, the combat holds up really well, and I was actually pretty surprised about that. The numbers are small, so everything means something. You take 3 damage, and that actually has an effect. Unlike something like Super Mario RPG, which was this game's predecessor, where you're going to be doing a lot of damage, you only start off with 10 HP here, and even an extra 1 on attack makes a big difference here. This, of course, did set the tone for the rest of the series, and while games have changed them up, some things have been in every game. You press a button just as you're being attacked to mitigate the damage, and you do the same thing while attacking to do more damage, like in Super Mario RPG. Then there's the badge system here, which does make the combat a little deeper. Badges are essentially equipable perks. You find or buy them throughout the game, then slot them in up to a limit set by your badge points. Some boost your attack, some add new moves, some change how you interact with enemies, some just make life easier in small ways. I went into this replay telling myself I was going to try something different, and then within 2 hours I'd settled on Power Bounce and Quake Hammer, and yeah, those were ones I used in my original playthrough. But what makes this system work is that the limited badge points force real trade-offs, so you're not just getting overpowered, but you're constantly choosing what kind of fighter you want to be. And the difficulty feels pretty fair throughout the game. It's not a super hard RPG, but it can give you a decent challenge. So the combat is fairly simple, but still really fun here. But for the partners, this is where I shifted my opinion the most, and not in a great direction. I still like them, I like their designs, each one still fills a distinct role, and the game builds its puzzles and world navigation around their abilities thoughtfully. Cooper hits distant switches, Bumpet blows open cracked walls, Power Carry carries Mario across wide gaps, Watt lights up dark areas and ignores enemy defense. It works as a system, but the character writing is just pretty thin here, and when I originally played this game, I hadn't yet played the Thousand Year Door, and I will get to the partners in that soon, but compared to that, there's not really much here. I guess maybe Lady Bo has the most personality of any of them, and she still basically disappears from the story the moment she joins your party. It just feels like a waste. When people say this game has great partners, I think they usually mean it has great partner concepts. The execution is very surface level compared to where the series would go next, and in my replay, I really didn't realize how much of a non-factor these characters are outside of just using them for specific puzzles. With that being said, going back to another big positive, the chapter design does a lot to compensate. So I remembered a lot of the chapters. Of course, Shy Guy's toy box is still one of the best areas in the whole series, and it's a hidden toy world underneath Toad Town, and Shy Guy's stealing everything from the residents above. And when I started this replay, this was the chapter I was looking forward to the most, and I was really hoping it would hold up, and I'm glad to say that it did. It has great music, great enemies with all the Shy Guy variations, the Gourmet Guy, which is one of the funniest enemies in the series, and you could tell how much fun the developers were having with this game. The Koopa Bros Fortress was another one I kinda half forgotten about, and it's a better first dungeon than I gave it credit for. The build up to fighting these 4 supposedly fearsome warriors is great, and then they show up and it turns out they're just Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle knockoffs. The game plays it completely straight, and it's just funnier for it. Tubba Blubba's chapter does something similar from a different angle, sneaking through his mansion while he hunts you, and he's essentially unkillable, and there's a lot of tension before the reveal that his heart physically detached from his body and has been running around loose around the manor this whole time. It's just such a bizarre premise that is something I've remembered for a long time, but I appreciated it more here. Forever Forest and Boo's Mansion kind of build off that slightly unnerving energy without losing the storybook tone, and that whole stretch from Toy Box through Boo's Mansion is one of the best sequences in the series. The atmosphere shifts chapter by chapter in ways that feel very deliberate and feel really segmented in a good way. What I didn't remember though was how much I'd struggled with certain sections. The Shiver City Mystery chapter, which was a murder mystery subplot in World 7, was something I really didn't remember much, and it got me stuck for longer than I wanted to admit because I misread one of the NPC clues and spent some time wandering around the wrong area. And remember, this is not a replay when I've technically seen this before, but it's been so long that I forgot a lot about this. The snow setting is also one of the more distinctive ones in the game, and Crystal Palace has a neat mirror gimmick, but that stretch is also where the backtracking is at its worst, making you cross the same frozen paths repeatedly to slowly inch the story forward. The Peach segments are something I'd consistently undervalued, and this replay really fixed that. Every chapter has a short section where you play as Peach sneaking around Bowser's castle, gathering information, working with the unfortunately named Twink, a small star kid, helping her from the inside, to pass things along to Mario. Keeps the story feeling connected rather than letting her disappear until the final dungeon like she does in basically every other Mario game. Bowser gets to be this big presence in his own castle, who's simultaneously threatening and completely oblivious to what's happening behind his back, and his diary entries tracking his slowly unraveling plan are worth the price of admission alone. This is a dude who got one magical item and immediately became convinced he was the most powerful being in existence, which we all know he's not because Luigi exists. But anyway, watching it fall apart from his perspective is funny, and it's something that I really didn't appreciate before. The whole game is built around collecting the 7 star spirits, which are guardian figures that Bowser imprisons across the world when he steals the Star Rod. Each one's locked away in a different area and guarded by a different boss, and getting them back is how Mario eventually breaks Bowser's invincibility and gets a fair fight at the end. It's a very simple structure, but it works because each spirit is tied to its chapter that has its own identity, its own cast, its own problems to solve, its own uniqueness compared to what we saw before and really what we saw after. The finale here is great. Like, you feel a real build up to this fight, and this was actually one of the most challenging fights for me in the Paper Mario series. So I haven't played this for around 12 years, and I wasn't really sure how it was going to hold up. I've consistently said that this is my 3rd favorite Paper Mario game, and I've mostly had good things to say about it, but that's coming from experiences I had with this game when I was like 11 or 12. Going back to it though, I'm happy to say that this is still a really great game. It is simpler than its successor, it's not a super deep RPG, but there's clearly so much love put into this game. The combat is still super fun, the locations and NPCs are great, and I appreciated the Peach interludes even more here. With that being said, it's not perfect. Like I said, the partners here were pretty boring after you first meet them. The prologue really drags, and the battle system, while simple, did leave some room to be desired. And I would actually say this is one of the few N64 games that has actually aged really well. The controls feel good, the visuals still hold up pretty well. Instead of going for that clunky early 3D game design, they went with a stylized paper design, which just simply looks a lot better now. I just want to say, if you're enjoying this so far, and if you're a big Paper Mario fan, look on screen for some of my other Paper Mario videos, so be sure to check those after and subscribe. This is the game that inspired this video, so I picked up a copy of the Thousand Year Door remake for Christmas, and it made me think about how long it's been since I played the previous games. So in full transparency, I didn't replay the original Thousand Year Door, I played the remake, but they are very similar games. I'll get to that a little more though. So I played T2ID on the Wii, using backwards compatibility not long after I played the original, but for years I heard everyone say this is the best RPG of all time. I'd watched some videos about it years earlier, but I went into it knowing that this was a game people raved about. So unlike being in the Mushroom Kingdom, this time you start in Rogueport, and Rogueport is, to be direct about it, a very shady town filled with a lot of evil residents. It's just a sketchy harbor city where everyone looks like they either have a criminal record or are trying to get one. There's even gallows in the middle of this town. I mean, this is a Mario game. There's enemies in the sewers here, and this entire town is pretty much a big contrast to the typical Mario hub world. Also, it's interesting that Rogueport pretty much tells you that this is going to be a darker story than the original, which was pretty simple. And personally, I think this is one of the best hub areas in the entire Mario series, not even just Paper Mario. It's just layered, full of secrets, full of characters doing their own things independent of Mario, and it keeps changing every time you come back from a chapter. There are details here I noticed in the remake that were in the original that I just never noticed before, and that density here is something Toad Town from the first game just never reached. The battle system here builds on the original's foundation, and the stage gimmick is what really elevates it, well, quite literally. Every fight happens on a literal stage with an audience watching, and that audience is a gameplay factor. They throw items to help you, or they throw rocks because apparently security sucks here. Lights can also drop from the ceiling mid-battle, and crowd energy builds star power based on how flashy and stylish your moves are, which you then spend on special attacks. Every fight here becomes a performance, and feels a lot more livelier than fights in the original. The badge system from the original also carries over, and Thousand Year Door simply just expands on it. Just more badges, more interesting combinations, but the same satisfying trade-off structure that made building your loadout feel a lot more like a real decision rather than just equipping the biggest numbers. And also a big thing here I didn't mention for the original is that the partners didn't have their own HP in the original. Here, they feel a lot more independent. Now, the animations are a little longer here than the original, so fights can feel a little bit slower, and I think it's only something you're really going to notice if you play these back to back, but it's still one of the best battle systems in the genre. The partners are where this game separates itself from everything before it, and it's not particularly close. Coming off Paper Mario 64's cast and stepping into TTYD's party feels like going from a group of NPCs to a group of actual people. And unlike some of the shallow backstories in the original, some of these characters have real motivations, like Coop's trying to find his dad, Bobby refusing to join you until you track down the letter from his late wife, and the scene is just handled very quietly with a lot of care, and feels something very foreign to Mario games. The writing is just very sincere here, and often doesn't feel like a joke like you might expect from a game like this. Sure, there's plenty of funny moments, but the game knows when to have that serious tone with these characters, and unlike the original where the partners kind of go silent after you get them, depending on what partner you have, they'll have unique dialogue depending on the situation. Every chapter also feels like a completely different kind of story, which is the other reason this game's reputation is what it is. The Glitz Pit is a sports movie crossed with a backstage mystery. You're climbing the ranks of a wrestling league as a newcomer called the Great Gonzalez, slowly figuring out why fighters keep disappearing and why Rock Clock, the reigning champion, seems personally threatened by your presence specifically. The further in you get, the clearer it becomes that something is very wrong in those back rooms, and the chapters reveal that the whole operation is being run by an entity using the fighter's star energy for something much darker, lands properly because the game earned it. The Excess Express, which is my favorite chapter, is basically like a murder mystery on a moving train, which we definitely haven't seen before, but I really like how it plays off this trope in a very Paper Mario way. You have to figure out who stole a passenger's ring, and why there's a bomb in someone's luggage, and whether the cook is involved in any of it. You're also working with Pennington here, who is a fan favorite for a reason. There's Twilight Town where the whole town is cursed and everyone just keeps turning into pigs, and I could pretty much go over every chapter here because I don't think there's a single bad chapter in this game. I think there's some that are weaker. I'm not a big fan of chapter 2, but there was no point in this game where I really just want to stop playing because it slowed down that much. I will get to that soon though. So we went over the chapters, but what about the actual characters here? I remembered most of them from my first playthrough, but how do they actually hold up here? So let's start with Dupless, and he's just as funny as ever. He steals Mario's identity and name. He literally kicks Mario out of his own name so you can't even type it. Spends half the chapter wearing your face while you run around as a shadow that nobody recognizes. It's actually kind of disturbing if you really think about it, and Dupless's theme is fantastic as ever in the remake. And then there's Magnus von Grapple, Lord Crump, the whole X-Nauts operation running out of the moon base, and unlike the original Paper Mario which just had Bowser, this is a whole new group with brand new enemies and new motivations. Grotus as the main villain behind the curtain gives the second half a lot more weight behind it, and the reveal of what's actually behind the Thousand-Year Door, which was a demon queen sealed away for 1,000 years with a cult that has spent generations trying to resurrect her, is one of the better late game pivots in the entire Mario series. Not even just Paper Mario. The pacing of this game honestly held up a lot better than I thought, and like I said, I did play the remake, and the biggest difference here, besides the improved graphics, improved soundtrack, and modern quality of life features, is that it fixes the general white quest, which was my least favorite part of the original. That has you go back to every single chapter, and it can get very tiring. Here, it is much easier. It was almost fixed completely here. I also attempted the Pit of 100 Trials during this replay, which I'd actually never finished before, and it's not super difficult, at least not for me. Since the battles here were so fun, I never tried to avoid enemies, and I just got up to a really high level, but with 100 consecutive battles with no saves, no ability to leave, it just got very boring. Now this is not something you have to do, it is completely optional, but honestly, unless you're trying to 100% the game, I don't really think it's worth it. There's plenty of other side content here that you don't need to do to progress. Finding the star pieces, hidden in pretty clever spots, I feel like none of them are really hidden unfairly, which can be a big issue in RPGs, especially when you just have so many hidden collectibles to find. Then of course there's the side quests that you can find in Rogueport, and since most people will only do a handful of the side content, I'd say you can expect to beat this game in around 25, maybe 30 hours, possibly even less, and the game never feels bloated at once. Sometimes we go back to games we haven't played for a while, and kind of ignore the pacing, kind of ignore how much the game drags, but I feel like this game never dragged at all. Like, I was actually stunned on how well it held up in a replay. I'm not someone who likes to replay games that often, and usually when I do, I try to finish a game quickly, but that wasn't the case with Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door. In fact, I think it may even be better than my first playthrough because I was really able to appreciate more of what the game offered. And yes, I know I played the remake and not the original, but they are fundamentally the same games with just a few differences. But I'm happy to say that this is still one of the best RPGs of all time and absolutely worth playing, especially if you could play the Switch version. Super Paper Mario was my first Paper Mario game. I got it on the Wii in 2008, played it several times growing up, and played it for a long time. It was just one of my favorites, not just my favorite Paper Mario, but literally one of my favorite games of all time. If you watch my video going over my top 10 favorite games of all time, you'll find Super Paper Mario in that video. I've probably replayed it like 6 or 7 times, so replaying it after its predecessors gave me a really good comparison critically. Coming off of the Thousand-Year Door, the lack of turn-based combat is obviously the first thing you do notice. It is a side-scrolling platformer that also has RPG elements, so that is why I consider it to be an RPG, but it is objectively a much simpler game in that regard. Now, you still do get XP, you still do get stronger because you get points for jumping on enemies, but there is a lot less here than its predecessors. However, with that being said, I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily. I still love Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door's combat, but I also don't mind the faster pace of Super Paper Mario. If you're going into the Paper Mario series and you love the combat, this may not be the game for you. But if you don't mind the faster pace and the more platformer style of this game, there's still a lot to love here. So let's start with the flip mechanic, because it's still my favorite thing in the game. Mario learns early on to switch between a 2D side view and a 3D perspective, and the whole game builds its exploration and puzzles about what you can and can't see from each angle. What looks like a flat wall blocking your path in 2D might be a thin edge in 3D with an entire corridor running behind it. A dead end in side view becomes a path when you rotate. Items and secrets are tucked into the 3D space specifically because they're invisible from the standard view, so the whole game rewards that reflex of stopping and looking. Now I remember the first time I played this as a kid and it just stunned me how creative this was. Like, I wanted to go into 3D in every single area to try to find every single item that was hidden, and it's a very fun mechanic, but I will say it does get a little worn out towards the end because there's not too much to it. Like, it is very simple, you press a button and just look around to see if there's anything hidden. It's definitely not as exciting as my first time playing this, or even the first couple times playing this, I should say. Then there's the pixels that replace partners, and I think it's one of the biggest steps down from T2ID, and since this was the first Paper Mario game I played, I didn't really know at the time how much of a downgrade these were. Now I still like the pixels, I like their designs. They are of course functional because what else would they do? You have Thrower who throws things, but Boomer who's a bomb still makes you thin, but they're just purely tools. None of them have arcs, and literally after you get them for the first time, they don't do anything story-wise or have any sort of character development, and rarely even have dialogue. And after spending the Thousand Year Door and having actual arcs with these partners, and having them with their own unique dialogue even later on, it is something I really did miss. However, even though the pixels are lacking here, the story is absolutely not lacking. So when I played this in 2008, I was 5 years old, and I couldn't appreciate the story. I could barely read at the time, but in my subsequent playthroughs, and even most recently when I really was paying attention, the story holds up probably better than anything else in the game. The main villain here is Count Bleck, who sets out to destroy all worlds with the void in the sky, and at first he just seems like your typical evil Paper Mario villain, but you find out he's doing this because he lost the woman he loved and decided erasing everything was the only thing left he could do. His father separated him from Timpani and wiped her memory, cursing her to wander through dimensions with no idea who she was or where she came from, and Bloomer, who you learn is Count Bleck, searched for her and couldn't find her, and eventually concluded that if she wasn't in the world, then the world didn't deserve to exist. While the Thousand Year Door has dark moments like this, Super Paper Mario really goes another step further. It has real themes of love and loss here, and has some pretty big twists like with Bloomer and Timpani. And speaking of Timpani, she is of course Tippy, who is your main companion throughout the entire game, and as it goes on you slowly get hints until it's revealed. There's also an insane amount of lore here. I made a video years ago and it's like 40 minutes just going over every bit of lore here, and this is a Paper Mario game. There's legitimately more lore here than probably the rest of the series combined, or at least maybe the entire series minus the Thousand Year Door, but Super Paper Mario still has more than that. And then there's the villain cast, which is still as great as I remembered. You have Ochunks, who's just the big, loud bruiser who treats every fight like a wrestling match, and at the end he actually sacrifices himself holding up a collapsing ceiling so Mario can escape, and it lands way harder than it should for a character who's been the comic relief up to that point. There's Nastasia, who you don't actually fight in the game, but she's Count Bleck's right hand the entire time. There's Mimi, who is maybe the creepiest character in the Paper Mario series, but even she ends up having a redemption arc. And of course the main one, who there's already going to be comments from people with Dementio profile pictures in this comment section, he's the villain that stands out the most here. He's very theatrical, he's just gesture maxing the whole game, and every line he delivered in the first half of the game looks differently once you know what he's been doing behind everyone's backs. You don't really notice this the first time you're playing it, but when you start to play it again, you really start to pick up on things. You of course learn that he was using Count Bleck the entire time, because he wanted to use the Chaos Heart to take over the world. He also brainwashed Luigi and turned him into Mr. L, and then used him as a vessel for the Chaos Heart, because of course Luigi being the most powerful character in the universe is why he was needed for this. So we talked a lot about the story, but how about the chapters themselves? I'd say Merly's Mansion is one of the most unique locations in any Mario game. This is where you first meet Mimi, and you go through this creepy mansion with these prisoners doing menial tasks, and this is where the developers really tried to be funny. In Chapter 2-3, you knock over an expensive vase and have to pay 1 million rubies, so while you're expected to just find the code and get them from a safe, you can spend hours in real life farming rubies to pay it off. And will anyone do this just in a playthrough, not for a YouTube video? Probably not, but it's just hilarious how it's there. And this seems to be one of the most controversial levels in the game, because some people really hate it, and it's not my favorite, but I do appreciate what the developers were trying to do here to really be creative. Unlike the Thousand Year Door though, it doesn't feel like every chapter is trying to be something completely different. They all have different themes. You have your standard opening world with the grasslands and the desert. You have Merly's Mansion's Chapter 2, you have the Bitlands is 3, you have Space is 4, and so on. But each one has its own story. Chapter 4, for example, has you finding Scorps, who becomes your companion throughout that chapter, and he's central to getting the pure heart here. You have the underwear here, where you transport Love Beef from there to the over there, and that's meant to represent a place between heaven and hell as you ascend to heaven. And right off the bat, that's just a crazy area for a Mario game. And while the gameplay isn't really varied here, the chapters definitely are, and they do have some pretty unique stories. So that's all well and good. What was I looking forward to the least on the replay? Samus Kingdom has some fantastic music, maybe one of my favorite songs in the series, and also some really gorgeous designs, but this is not a fun chapter. Outside of the story elements, which I do appreciate, all you do is just fight very similar Samer guys until you move on. So you don't actually fight 100 here, you can later on, but for the main story, it is very boring. And then after chapter 6-2, when you fight Mimi, the world gets destroyed and you go back and you just go through this whole barren wasteland where there's no color and just ambient music playing. And from a story perspective, that's great, but from a gameplay perspective, it's not the best. Same with space, where it is interesting, but a couple of the levels just feel really slow as you're gliding through space or floating through space or whatever you want to call it. So we went over the story and the characters, and that's all fantastic. There's a lot of NPCs here I didn't even talk about, but how does the gameplay actually hold up? It is simpler than Paper Mario the Thousand Year Door and the original Paper Mario, and it's more of a platformer than an RPG, but for me personally, I love platformers, especially Mario platformers, and combining this with Mario RPG elements really hit a great balance for me, and I also really love when Mario games like this have a unique story, have unique locations, and I think this game holds up very well. I think if you haven't played in any games in the series, you might still like this the best, if this type of gameplay is what you prefer. With that being said, replaying this and being more critical, I definitely do notice some flaws with it. It is far from a perfect game. The difficulty here is ridiculously easy. I had no trouble throughout the game. The 3D mechanic, while fun, is very simple, but I still really enjoyed my replay, and if you haven't played this yet, I don't think it's the most replayable game unless you're someone like me who just loves this already, but I'm still happy to say that I really still love this game. This is the game I was dreading replaying the most, and it's a game I hadn't touched for over a decade. Sticker Star is one of those games where the more context you have going in, the worse it looks. Now, I played this one originally before Paper Mario or the Thousand Year Door, and all I really knew from the series at the time, at least from playing, was Super Paper Mario. But I got my 3DS, I saw Paper Mario, and it's one of the first games I wanted when I got my 3DS. It has charming presentation, it has some interesting ideas, but of course it was very light on substance. Going back to it now after 3 great RPGs, the problems are visible from the first hour, and in a way they were not when I was going in blind. So the structure is worth explaining for anyone who hasn't played it. Rather than an interconnected world to explore, Sticker Star uses a world map where you select individual short stages, complete them, and exit back to the map, kind of like a new Super Mario Bros. Game. And of course, while Super Paper Mario was very linear, you would just go into the door and go level to level. It felt like this was trying to be more like the original games, but be limited being on a handheld console. But that does make sense, even if it's not my favorite way to go about exploration. I'd say the biggest problem here, and something that I've talked about in all my Paper Mario videos, has been the combat. So is it really as bad as I remember? Let's talk about that. The core issue is the one that sounds the smallest, but really isn't. There's no experience points. There's no leveling up. When you beat an enemy, you get coins and maybe stickers, and that's all that happens. Nothing changes about Mario. You spent those stickers to win the fight, and now you have some coins, and the encounter is just over. I didn't really notice this as much in the original, but I of course knew about this going into the replay, and it's honestly worse than I remembered. I try to run past as many enemies as I can because I didn't want to fight. There was no reason for it. The combat is such a huge part of these games, and the fact that you're dissuaded from participating in it is a huge flaw, maybe one of the biggest flaws in the entire series. Even Super Paper Mario had reasons to fight enemies, and of course that was a lot quicker. Now, playing this not long after the original 2 games, especially the Thousand Year Door, where I wanted to fight as many enemies as I could, where I didn't feel like running from battles, this was a massive downgrade. And then the sticker system just compounds this. Every attack is consumable. Jump stickers, hammer stickers, special stickers, all gone after one use, so every battle just becomes this running calculation of whether you want to actually use these stickers or save them. And for me, I didn't want to use my good stickers here, because there was no reason to. I didn't get anything out of it. You're just going to end up hoarding stickers for stronger bosses. And then speaking of bosses, this is where the system fully collapses, because most of them have specific thing sticker solutions, which are real-world objects you've converted into a battle item, like a fan or a faucet or an iron, and without the right one, the fight basically doesn't progress. The Wiggler chapter is the most notorious example. You're chasing a dismembered Wiggler across multiple levels, collecting his body segments. Each area is structured around the absence of a partner or any real reason to engage with it, and then the boss requires a specific item the game doesn't point you towards. Without partners, it also just feels lonely in a way that's hard to describe until you're in it. You have Kirsty who's giving you hints and reacting to some things, and she's okay at best, but there's no depth here. She doesn't really have much of an arc. And when you go from Super Paper Mario, which admittedly had pixels which weren't the best, but still had Tippy who had a lot of personality and a lot of character development, it just feels like something is missing here. Not only that, but the whole world is just toads and familiar enemy types and environments that could have come from any game in the franchise. Bowser Jr. shows up periodically, but is about as developed as you'd expect. Bowser himself is completely silent and stripped of personality, which was a specific decision from Nintendo at the time to avoid original characters and minimalize dialogue for established ones, and this choice just made this game and brutal to go through. I didn't really care for this much in my first playthrough, and going back to it, I was hoping there'd be something I missed because I've been talking about this game badly for like a decade, but it really is just as bad as I remember, and there's so few good things going on here. Like sure, the music is alright, even though it's probably the weakest in the series. The visuals look good for a 3DS game, but I mean, it's still a 3DS game. There's some creative levels, like the World 4 ice stages have some creative level design, but it just feels like such a shallow game that took everything the first 3 games did well and just completely removed it. No unique locations, no unique characters, barely any story elements, awful backtracking, which has you going to random levels in different worlds to find the specific thing you need with almost no hint, and the game just drags on when you're playing for 25 or 30 hours trying to finish this. My replay was shorter because I tried to play through it quickly, because nothing here kept me engaged. Replaying the first 3 games, I really never felt bored playing them. I still took my time to enjoy the games. With this, I really gave it a chance early on, but I just had no motivation. There was no reason to fight, no cool locations to take in, no interesting NPCs to talk about, no fun side quests. There are people who like this game, and I understand that, because for me, Super Paper Mario being my favorite in the series is completely subjective, even though it's not objectively the best, but I just cannot get into Sticker Star at all again, and this will probably be the last time I replay this game, because I really feel like there's nothing I was missing out on. Now, Paper Mario Color Splash is the first game I played on release day. I saw the trailer for it in the Direct, got it the day it came out in 2016, and I finished it over a couple weeks, but then I didn't really think about it much until this replay. I didn't hate the game, but I just kind of finished it and never really wanted to go back. But now, nearly 10 years later, I can say that there are some things I do like a little better now, but still some things that I actually found more frustrating. So the setup here is you go to Prism Island, and it's had all its color drained by someone who got into the black paint, turning the world pale and dull, and Mario meets Huey, who's a talking paint can, to restore it. As you move through the world, you're splashing color back into drained areas, which functions as both an exploration mechanic and the game's central visual payoff. It's a good premise, and the world it enables looks stunning. Like, the Wii U really give the developers room to go deep on the papercraft aesthetic, and they really used all of it. The environments actually look like handmade art here. It has cardboard edges and folded paper textures, and paint that looks really good here. It builds off the Sticker Star format, where it looks like papercraft, but they went a lot further here, of course having much better visuals. And this game still looks fantastic 10 years later, so I can say that is something I appreciate even on my replay. The writing here is also better than I remembered. Huey is a big upgrade over Kirsty. He has a lot more personality, he's a lot funnier, and he has more of an arc here. There's a bit where he encounters things for the first time and immediately forms extremely committed takes, and it works consistently across the game rather than wearing thin. The broader humor here is also just a lot funnier than Sticker Star. There's a scene where a group of toads get into a heated philosophical debate about whether a train car counts as art or transportation. Completely unnecessary dialogue that exists purely to be funny. Color Splash just has a lot more of that than Sticker Star, and it does show. Kamek as a recurring antagonist is something I'd completely forgotten about, and he's fine here. He keeps showing up with increasingly elaborate schemes to stop Mario, and the game doesn't treat him as a serious threat and leans into more comedy, but I definitely would have preferred a more unique character here. There are some really cool chapters here, unlike Sticker Star, which I felt like had pretty much nothing unique. There was the Sunset Express chapter, which had you on another train mystery, and had passengers acting strange, things disappearing, and having something clearly wrong, and you're talking to everyone on board, piecing it together, and following leads across train cars, and it basically is a direct descendant of the Excess Express from the Thousand Year Door. That's something I really didn't remember from my first playthrough, but I really did like that here. Then there's also a chapter that's World 1-1 from Super Mario Bros. 3, and I love when Mario games have references like this. This was actually something I covered all the way back in 2016 on my other channel if you want to find that video. But of course, being a direct sequel to Sticker Star, it does share a lot of design problems. There's consumable cards, very few unique NPCs, not a great story, barely any XP, although there is, you do upgrade your paint bucket, but you don't really need that. You don't actually get stronger though. And like with Sticker Star, there was not much of an incentive for me to fight. It's also a lot more annoying here because you have to select the card, paint it, swipe up on the gamepad, rinse and repeat, and it made me want to avoid fights even more. The loop of spending cards to get coins to buy more cards just never builds anything, and within a few hours I got pretty bored of this game. There's also the thing cards here too, and while the improvements help, like the backtracking isn't as bad here, it still is not very rewarding. The world still being full of toads is the thing that makes Color Splash feel most hollow against the original trilogy. And it's not really about toads specifically, it's about what happens to a world when you replace an original cast with generic recurring characters. Rogueport felt alive because every corner had someone with their own situation and personality, but Color Splash's Prism Island had toads in just different colors. Some of them tried to be funny. Look at some of the toads in the Thousand Year Door, who have different costumes on, vastly different designs, and compare it here where you have blue toad, green toad, and red toad. I'd say the biggest thing I did notice on my replay though was just how fantastic the music is. Now I remember liking the soundtrack, but it is so good here. I love the ragtime feel of it. I like a lot of the calmer tracks like Cherry Lake. It kind of reminds me of like Pixar shorts from the 2000s in a way, like some of the songs, and I don't know how to explain that, but it's something that I really didn't appreciate enough in my first playthrough. Overall in my replay, there are things I found here that I did like better now, but I still stand by my opinion that this just isn't a very good game. It's alright for what it is. I had more fun with it than Sticker Star because there was more creativity put into it, like with the train, like with the Super Mario Bros. 3 reference, and the soundtrack here was a lot better, but fundamentally, it is Sticker Star 2. It suffers from the same issues. It has the world map, it has very little incentive to battle, it lacks a bunch of interesting NPCs, and it just feels kinda meh. It's not an awful game, but I really wasn't having fun a few hours into my replay and kinda just wanted to get it over with. By the time Origami King came out, I more or less made peace with the modern Paper Mario being what it was. I played it on launch day, thought it was an improvement, but I never really wanted to replay it. It's easily the best of the modern 3, and I don't think it's close at all, but it's still held back by the same fundamental combat problem. Now this I didn't play that long ago, I played it a little less than 6 years ago, which is when it launched, but I hadn't touched it since. This is a game a lot of people do love though. While Sticker Star and Color Splash are widely considered to be bad or mediocre games, I've seen a lot of people have Origami King as high as their second favorite. Some people even have this as their favorite Paper Mario game. But replaying it now, was I just too harsh on it, or was my opinion justified? So let's start with the art direction, because it looks even better than Color Splash, which already looked great. However, I did get kind of tired of the papercraft style. If you look at the first 3 games, they use the paper aesthetic as just that, an aesthetic. They don't try to overwhelm you with paper gimmicks, and by here, they're really just pushing it further and further, and it's kind of just gotten a little tiring, but that's just a small part of it, and like I said, it still does look really stunning. The colors are also really bright here and do show off the environments, and that's something that I really didn't remember from my first playthrough, just how good this game looks. And since this game is more open, it doesn't have the world map, there's a lot more room for the design of these areas, and while you don't have as unique places as something like the Thousand Year Door or Super Paper Mario, it is an improvement, and then the music here is the best in the modern trilogy. And like with Color Splash, when I first played it, I didn't really notice how great the music was, and I actually noticed it a little after, but going back to the replay and hearing everything this game has to offer, Nintendo really did knock it out of the park here. Like, it just feels a lot more orchestral, it feels a lot grander, and it did make my playthrough a lot more enjoyable actually. So anyway, going back to some of the more unique locations, I would say Shogun Studios, which is the ninja-themed amusement park, is one of those highlights, and it's something I almost completely forgotten. Revisiting it was one of the better surprises of the replay. It had a mystery layered over the tourist trap premise, and I don't know if you could tell, but I seem to like mysteries in Paper Mario games, and it had a cast of ninja characters doing their best to keep the park running under strange circumstances. Now, it's not the glitz pit, but you can see the developers at least trying more here. The story is also the most developed the modern era has managed, and Ollie is the most interesting villain it's produced. He wants to fold the entire world into origami, which sounds like a standard Paper Mario villain, but his actual motivation is more specific and sad. He found a message written on him by a human hand and misread it as an insult when it was an expression of affection, and he built his entire worldview and plan to destroy everything on that misreading. Your companion here is Olivia, who's King Ollie's sister, and she has to face what her brother has become and help Mario on his adventure, and it actually is handled with more care than I remembered. I think I've been on record saying that the story here is bad, and if I'm being honest, it's not a great story, but it is better than I remember. There is more here. It's not just completely forgotten about like Sticker Star, like Color Splash. And as for partners here, Color Splash of course didn't have them, and Origami King doesn't exactly have them, but kind of has them. There's Bobby the Bob-omb, who is a fan favorite, and while he looks like a normal Bob-omb, that's also kind of the point. He's slowly recovering his lost memories, and even sacrifices himself for Mario, and while I remember that, it does hit even harder here. With that being said, there aren't traditional partners or even pixels. You don't actually have control of them, and they're not there for the entire game. It's not like you can just swap between partners either, and that is once again something that I'm missing, but at least the partners that you do get here do have personality. But I'd say where things fall down once again is the combat. So it is different here. There's the ring puzzle mechanic, and the way it works is enemies are arranged on a series of rings, and you rotate and slide them to line up enemies. If you line them all up in a row, that allows you to do better combos and hit more enemies. And there are different ways to approach this. Like if you get the puzzle right, you're rewarded with that efficiency, but it does get very repetitive after a while, like the cards in Color Splash. And again, the biggest issue here is that there is no XP. Like, the concept here is interesting, I'll give it that, but after a couple hours, the novelty of that kind of gets paper thin. And I just didn't want to battle enemies anymore, but in a turn-based RPG, I want it to be fun to actually fight the enemies, and it just wasn't here. It just got boring, repetitive, and I had no motivation after a little while. Now, I will say that the boss fights show what the mechanic can do when it's used well, because instead of lining up enemies, you're navigating rings to reach activation points and trigger environmental interactions, and that is pretty interesting because it's switching things up. And speaking of the bosses, you have the Legion of Stationery here, and some people really love them, but I don't really see the hype. They're just basic office supplies. They don't have the personalities of Thousand Year Door villains, of Super Paper Mario villains, but I guess they are more creative than what we've seen in the previous 2 games. Now the ending here is pretty solid, like it is rewarding to finish this game, and this is a game I can recommend to people, but it's not a great game in my opinion. I was really hoping that I would notice something else here that would make me appreciate the game more, and while there were a couple things that I did mention, it just didn't really do much for me. I think I actually made a community post where I went over this saying, replaying the Thousand Year Door had me wanting to fight every enemy, had me wanting to just play through the game, but Origami King just didn't have that, and I feel like that's the difference between a game that really sticks out to me and a game that doesn't. game that I just want to keep playing, that I don't want to put down, versus a game that feels like a chore to get through. And that's kind of how I felt about it originally. Now, some people love this game, and that's totally fine. This is just my own personal opinion, but I just simply don't really care for the Sticker Star style, and while this does change a lot of things up, but it is fundamentally a lot like Sticker Star. So after replaying all these games, have any of my opinions really shifted? I'd say overall not really. In fact, I'd say some of my opinions only got stronger. Sticker Star I actually think is worse now. Color Splash, I do like the music better now, and I actually would say I like it a little better, but I still don't think it's great. And same thing with the Origami King. I can say that maybe I like it a little better now, but I didn't really miss much from my first playthrough. These just don't really feel like big RPGs, and they just feel very shallow. Now, something like Super Paper Mario, while the gameplay may not be as good after replaying it, I could still appreciate a lot of different things about it. The locations, the NPCs, the story, some of the side content. The Thousand Year Door was better than I remembered. It's rare for me to replay a game and like it even better the second time, as I just wanted to play through this again, and I want to see everything the game had to offer. And then the original Paper Mario was very fun to replay. I hadn't played it in a very long time, and while it has some N64 era quirks, and the prologue was pretty annoying, it's just a fun game throughout, and I would love a remake of this. My opinion on this series has pretty much stayed the same, where I think the first 3 games are masterpieces, and the most recent 3 have been hit or miss, with the best being alright. And you know what? This is just my personal opinions of these games. If you haven't played these games for a long time, it may be worth it to go back for you, because I'm just giving my opinions on this, but you could have a totally different experience. Maybe you love the Origami King and hate Super Paper Mario, and that's totally fine. Let me know your thoughts on this, and if you agree or disagree with some of my takes on this, because I want to hear your thoughts on the series, because it does mean a lot to me. Thank you for watching, and be sure to subscribe.